Good morning. This classroom is on change. Create change, hardy organizations. Our teacher this morning, presenter, is Pam Gardiel. Some of us have been in her session before. She has been a CPM teacher where I first got to meet Pam. She has been doing consulting work for many, many years. Organizational behavior is her background. She is a phenomenal friend. I'm happy to work with Pam. Please give your full attention to Pam Gardiel.
Thanks, Liz. Good morning. We made it through all of the travails of traffic, and I understand you folks saved the day down the road a piece and had your snow plows move the bales of hay on the freeway. Such amazing stories that I learned from you folks. We are going to talk about change, and what the basic law of the universe is change. We will leave this session today at a molecular level, a different person from when we came in. Change is the basic law of the universe, and yet I think what happens is our life goes so rapidly, things are changing so quickly, there are so many demands of us that we tend to look for, long for, search for some stability. And one of the things that organizations, public, private, nonprofit, it doesn't matter, what they are really good for is creating processes, structures, cultures that reinforce consistency, status quo. I'm sure you've never heard the phrase, well, we've always done it this way. And because organizations inherently build into what they do consistency, predictability, things that allow us to anticipate how have we done it in the past, what are the things that help us work, predict, not have to reinvent the wheel every time. Sometimes those predictable processes undermine our ability to be adaptable and respond to the inevitability of change that happens all around us. I'm older than dirt, and I can remember, I grew up in the northwest part of Salt Lake City, and I used to drive out to 123rd South, and I remember the freeway ending at 21st South. And just taking, the little road all the way out, and to see how we have grown over these decades is phenomenal. And the projections for growth along the Wasatch Front are really quite sobering. And how on earth are we going to adapt to all of that? And the impact of that growth and development on UDOT to respond to all of that is a challenge, of course, that you are planning for, you're addressing, you're dealing with all the time. And so we can say that organizations are looking at strategic directions. How do we remain relevant to our stakeholders? How are we certain that we're not only relevant to them, but we are ahead of the curve on what is coming at us? What are the changing expectations of our citizens? And how do we as an organization respond to those? Well, so we have that periphery, if you will, that parameter, those parameters that say we have to look at things into the future, we have to look at things dealing with the changes coming at us. But in the meantime, we have a body of work that we still have to do. We have daily work, weekly work, those kinds of things that simply must be done. And so even though we can look strategically and we can say, my belief, my intent, my commitment is to do those things that lead us forward, I still have to get the work done today. And I have 32 emails to respond to just in this hour. I have deadlines I have to meet, and all of those things then have to be done in this world that is changing consistently. And so what I often hear is people say that we as human beings are resistant to change. Would you agree, disagree that we're resistant to change? Why would you disagree? Or excuse me, why would you agree? Yeah. Okay, how many in here? Okay, so our first reaction is being disconcerted, fear. What am I going to do with it? Okay, it's not going away. I have to deal with it. Please.
This is just a funny story, but when my daughter was 5, we had this really ugly linoleum in the house that we moved into. So my daughter was 5, we pulled the linoleum and put new ceramic tile, and I was all excited, and my daughter just cried. It's like, what in the world? She just didn't want anything to change. That was just so interesting to me that she would even care, but it's just that whole idea of change is uncomfortable.
Yeah, and so whether we're 5 or we're 105, our first reaction can often be, what am I going to do with this? How is this going to make me vulnerable? And so I brought you some information from William Bridges. Some of you may be familiar with his book, Transitions. And what he poses, he and Dr. Margaret Wheatley, who used to be at BYU, say that human beings don't resist change. What they resist is the implication of the change. And so our first reaction is, what is this going to do to me? Please.
Yeah, I think that's why some people like change as long as they initiated the change.
Ah. And why do they like it if they're the one initiating it?
They know what's going to happen, they're in control, and you don't feel vulnerable in that moment.
So control is a key word, isn't it? Once we feel we have some control of what this change means to us, we're not as likely to be intimidated by it, afraid of it, as resistant to it. And you brought up, I think, the key point, and forgive me for my beautiful writing, as I'm adapting to the background for the flip chart. And so in organizations, when we are the people leading others through a change, the key thing that we can understand is, what are the ways in which we give people a voice in what's going to happen regarding this change? One of my favorite phrases is, people own that which they have a voice in creating. The change is going to come at us, but what we want to do as leaders is facilitate people's becoming comfortable with it. The change, we don't get to not have the change happen, but what are the ways in which we transition to the beginning of our new identity? So if you'll look at the handout, and let me get one for everyone. Where are the extras? Here they are. Oh, thank you. I just need one, please. Thank you. Okay, Wavy Dave, if you're in my class, you get to be involved as well. This is Wavy Dave. He is helping with the sound. Okay, so managing organizational change and transition. How do we create organizations that are change hardy rather than resistant? So look at this first table that I've given you. Look at the difference between change and transition. Look at change is an event, it's situational, it's outcome focused. We may not know what the focus is, but we got to do something to change, and so as a result, we haven't walked through everything that needs to be done. You're welcome. But we still know we can't be where we are. Okay? So there may be stages to a change. Any change that happens in our life, well, there are some that happen instantaneously. We don't like those. But most changes have stages. We're going to move to a new house. Well, we have to sell the old one. We have to pack up stuff. We have to make all of these stages. So it can be structured, planned, managed, and it usually has a rational formula. There is a reason for the change. Sometimes the reason may be sound, sometimes it isn't. Sometimes it's just reactive. But change usually, and we're only here for an hour and a half, so we're not going to talk about the implications of some of the other things, but if we look at change as an external stimuli to which we have to respond, what are the ways in which we respond? All right, as leaders, what we want to understand then is that all of us go through a transitional process to come to peace, not only with the change, but to identify with where we're going to go. So we experience the change, we go through a psychological process. We are focused on what it says, process focused, and one of the things that I've found is that people's first response is, what's in it for me? Does that make sense? What's in it for me? So where you've all seen with them, what's in it for me? Liz, can we get our new friends some coffees? Thank you. Looks like 3 new friends. Welcome. Okay, so what's in it for me? It's an evolutionary process. If our first reaction, if the change is happening to us rather than with us, our first reaction will be fear, resistance, skepticism, whatever it may be. We're not so sure that we buy into the change, or even if we think the change is a good thing, we still want to know, how is it going to affect us? I was working with a state agency several years ago, and the director asked me to go work with one of the regions where there seemed to be a lot of resistance to change. And what I often hear is, will you go fix? I can't fix anything, but there's little things flying around in the air here. Just as long as they don't go under my contacts, we're good. And so I went down and I talked to them and said, so talk to me about how you're feeling about these changes. Oh, you can see the reaction, this. There's no way we can do it. There's too much coming at us. We can't be successful at all of this. Why are they not realistic on what the implications of all of these changes are? You can hear these kinds of responses. I said, well then, what would it take in order for you to feel comfortable with the change? They said. Well, and their first reaction was, make the change go away. Well, remember the basic law of the universe is change? So I said, well, I have no authority to do that, and so let's look at the next option. And so what I asked them to do was to talk to me about what about the change did they feel they had no control over. Okay, if we are feeling fearful of change, resistance to change, does this list get pretty large? Can we react and come up with all kinds of things to put on this list? Yeah, and they just gave me all kinds of things. I said, all right, now what I want you to tell me about are what are the things within the context of this change that you feel you can influence, you can do something about, you can control. Well, as you can imagine, this list was much shorter, wasn't it? So one of the things we understand as leaders who are facilitating change and fostering change hardiness is we need to give people the opportunity for that internal dialogue of how do they feel. And we always want to start with asking them about those things that they feel they can't control. If they are resistant to change, the reason they're feeling that way is because they feel vulnerable and that they don't have control of the change. Would you agree or disagree with that? Okay. Anybody want to share anything? Please feel free to push back at any time. I am not the keeper of all knowledge and wisdom. Okay. So we know then that change is an external dynamic that occurs to us, but we have to go through an internal process in order to come to peace with the change. Let me give you another example. City of Seattle was raising one of their buildings where a number of the departments were housed. And they were going to ask all of the departments in that building to move for those of you familiar with Seattle, to the Seattle City Center, which is a 42-story high-rise in downtown Seattle. And I got a call from the head of one of the departments, and he said, will you come talk to Joe? Joe is determined that he is not moving out of this building, and we're going to raise it in 2 weeks. Now, was Joe aware of that? Absolutely. Did he understand that he would be at peril if he stayed? Yes. It wasn't that he didn't understand what was happening, but there was an internal dynamic that was occurring that had not been addressed in order for him to feel comfortable with the move. So I said, Joe, talk to me. What's going on here? I am not moving. First reaction, here's my position. The change is coming. I'm putting up my resistance. I said, okay, why? Why aren't you going to leave the building? You're going to be pretty lonely, and here's subtext. It's not going to be a pretty picture. You're going to be pretty lonely here. And so to give you the Cliff Note version, Joe had worked for this department forever. And he had a cubicle that was about this big. It was a huge cubicle in cubicle terms, you know, the prairie dog cubicles, right? And since he had worked there forever, he had filled it up with all kinds of stuff. Now, a lot of it was work-related, and there were piles, I kid you not, piles of paper and documents all over the place. But his prized possession was the rack of moose antlers that he had. He'd shot the moose himself. This was important. This was the Northwest. He was proud of this rack of antlers. Now, I said, well, they're wonderful. Help me understand why this means you won't move to the new building. Well, there was a code at the Seattle City Tower of what you could and what you could not bring. And guess what was on the you may not bring list? Yeah. And the process at the old building was that as the citizen came in to talk to whomever in this process, they would say, okay, now you need to go down the hall to see Joe. You can't miss him. He is the one with the moose antlers, right? This was his identity. And he couldn't take them with him. I said, well, Joe, let's figure out what we can do to manage this process. It wasn't that he didn't understand that he did, in fact, have to go. But no one had allowed him to work through the fact that he was losing his identity. Drop down with me below the word resistance, loss of identity and world. He was going to lose influence because he wasn't going to be able to show that he was a great hunter. He was losing status. He was losing personal identity. He was losing some of the things on this list. So I said, well, Joe, what if we were to take a picture of you holding your antlers, and we blew it up, and we put it on the side of your new prairie dog cubicle, as big as we could get it? Would that work? Well, yeah. If I can't take the antlers, I guess that would work. So that was exactly what we did. We took a picture of Joe. We put it on the side of his cubicle. He took the antlers home with him, and he moved by the end of the week to the Seattle City Tower. Now, I said to the leader, why did you talk with Joe? Oh, you know, he's old and crusty, and we just figured he wanted to be resistant. Now, what we know about change is people will, in fact, it says it on here somewhere, which I'm not able to see right now. People are going to move through change at their pace, not yours. Would you agree or disagree with that? Yeah. Now, can we be cranky because they're not yes, they're not moving through the change at the speed we would like them to? Yeah, we can be, but the more as the leader we try to push them, what are they going to do? They're going to resist, aren't they? We learned that when we were about this big. What was one of our favorite words when we were about this big? No. We heard it a lot, and we learned it. And what were we learning at that age? We were learning boundaries. We were learning the difference between out there and in here. And we want to govern our own lives. That desire does not go away. And so if we push people to change, and yet we've not given them a voice in the change, or we've let them assess what do they not control, what do they control, we've given them some way to process, what we end up is either with resistant behavior or passive aggressive behavior. Does that make sense? If you don't give me a voice, I will find a way to get even. You're smiling. Anything that you'd be willing to share with us? I'd rather not. Okay, but you can relate. We all can relate, right? What did we do as kids when change happened to us rather than with us? We pouted, we dug in, we found ways. My daughter is 36, and she just had a little one, and she was talking about what she was doing while she was pregnant to ensure the health of the baby, and she was remembering back to when she was a child, and I made her drink a smoothie drink, only it was called protein at the time, and she hated it. And she had this little cabinet, this little kitchen cupboard that her grandfather had made her. And she used to think she was putting one over on me because she would pretend to drink it. And as soon as I disappeared, she would go put it in the cupboard and not drink it. Do we all have cupboards where we put stuff when we don't want to do things? Yeah, we have ways to do that still. Okay, come with me to that middle paragraph, or that middle table there where it says phases of transition. Let's assume that I am standing here in relation to the change that's over there. What Dr. Bridges says is first we must understand and respect and allow people to process the ending of life as they have known it, which is exactly what I did with Joe. I let him process what he was losing. So when we are at a point where we have to let go of what we have known, there has to be a sense of disengagement with that. But if that is our identity, there has to be a closure, a saying goodbye. Let me give you another example. There's a small company in Menomonee Falls, Wisconsin. It's called Glenroy. And I'm not even sure what it is they make. But they were looking at some of their processes and policies and finding that they were not successful. Well, they had this whole book full of all the policies and procedures related to their work. And what had happened is they had so many policies and procedures, it was a boondoggle. It was like a bowl of wet spaghetti. You couldn't tell what started, what ended. And so they decided they were going to make some profound changes. Now, what they had to do was let go of what was. And so Menomonee Falls is not all that far from Green Bay, Wisconsin. I think there's a football team there. Something, yeah. And so they had excuse me. They had a tailgate party. And they took all the policies and procedures manuals and they put them in a 55-gallon drum and they lit it on fire. And they had a tailgate party roasting hot dogs or whatever using the policies and procedures manuals as the fuel. Could you ever pull them out of the fire again? No, they were gone. But there was something that said, this is the end of the way we did it, and let's have some fun in the process. Now, I don't advocate that everyone have a tailgate party and burn up the policies and procedures manuals or whatever it is, but what is the way that we acknowledge that the way we've done it in the past is not the way we're going to do it moving forward. Because if I am standing here and you want me to go over there, I may stay grounded right here. I'll pay lip service. I may even do some things you want me to do, but I'm remembering the way it used to be in the good old days. Would you agree or disagree with that? Yeah. We can say, yeah, but we keep looking backward. And what happens while we keep looking backward? We are losing focus and time and energy and effectiveness on where we want to go. So don't ask people to move just because we said. What are the ways in which we give people some time to process? Now, please understand that I am not saying that this is a hold hands and sing kumbaya experience. That is not what I am saying at all. But what I am saying is that we understand that human beings are always going to want some level of control of those things that affect them, and they want to know what's in this change for them, with them, what's in it for me. Any comments or observations? Okay. So, endings. We need to do something to acknowledge the ending. What worked the way we used to do it? What didn't work? What are the compelling reasons we need to move to a different place? So then we get to what's called the neutral zone. Now look down at the bottom of the first page where it says signs of transition. Now, who will read that quote for us from Marilyn Ferguson? Do I have a volunteer? Thank you. Please.
It is not much that it is not so much that we're afraid of change or so in love with the old ways, but it's that place in between that we fear. It's like being between trapezes and Linus when his blanket is in the dryer. There's nothing to hold on to.
I don't know about you, but I could just see Linus standing there with his hands on the dryer waiting for his blanket to come out. It's that period where we're not grounded in the way we used to do it. We really haven't become fluent at the new way we're doing it. What is it we do? Now, that change hardy place allows us to do some new thinking. In fact, if you turn to the top of the second page, the 7 principles of transition management, look at number 3, number 4, and number 5. The hiatus, the transition, can be a creative time. If we are not locked into the way we've always done it, and we are paying attention to where we want to go, look at the possibilities that occur. The transition is developmental. There's a wonderful phrase from a biologist, Dr. Varela, who says that when a system is out of alignment, and by out of alignment, he doesn't mean that it's broken. He just means that it isn't best positioned to respond to the changes that are coming at it. When a system is out of alignment, put it in touch with itself, and it'll solve the problem. So during that transition stage is when you want to bring folks together to talk about what are the possibilities. If this is what we need to do, what are the best ways in order for us to do it? And that's exactly what I did with Joe. What is the way in which we can honor your identity, but still put that in alignment with the code within the new building? Now, his first reaction was, there is no way I'm going. He couldn't see the possibilities. Change hardiness means that we facilitate the awareness of folks to a new place. Our first reaction is, we're not going. Okay, come back with me to the first page. Okay, so we have to have our closing, whatever that is, the saying goodbye, the tailgate party, whatever it is. The transition point is where people are actively involved in helping to define their new future. They have not arrived yet. Only when they've had the opportunity to go through that discussion are they ready to come to the beginning. You know, when I first read Dr. Bridges' book, I thought, wait a minute, a change means that we start with a beginning. And so it was interesting for me to discover that no, there has to be a respect of what we've lost before we move to the beginning. Because ultimately, you want me to focus here and start moving in this direction. So then we know we have a beginning. What is the vision of where we're going to go? What does it look like? What are we going to need? What part do I have? What do I get to own? Those kinds of things now ground folks in a new place. Okay, so again, the statement here says resistance is the transition, not the change that people resist. So down at the very bottom, the grass elements, what I'd like you to think about, we've got guilt, resentment, anxiety, self-absorption, and stress. I'd like you to think of a change that maybe you're currently going through or have recently gone through, or it's coming up. And I'd like you to look at those words, and if you have a pencil or a pen, or if you just want to think about it, do you relate to any of those, of the grass words? And if so, what is the way in which you manifest your feelings? I'd like, if possible, if you can think of a change that you're facing at UDOT, something that relates to your work environment. So I'm going to give you just a couple of minutes to just jot down whatever you're thinking or to think about it. Okay, forgive me for interrupting, but let me ask, any thoughts or ideas that came to mind that you'd be willing to share with us? We don't need to know the situation, and probably the feelings you're having we've all experienced. Who would share? Thank you.
So I was kind of looking at these words and I was going, well, if I don't like the change, if I feel like I wasn't ever a part of it or anything, I feel more like the resentment.
Okay, so it happened to you rather than with you, which happens a lot in life, right?
And if I do like the change, I'm probably more like the self-absorption, going, okay, now I can influence this to make the change the way I think it should be.
So there's a sense of ownership if you feel you've had a voice. And that ownership then has you thinking internally about how do I set this up to succeed? How do I play a significant role in that? Let's assume, on the other hand, that you weren't included in the change. What self-absorption might you have in that regard? It's happening to you rather than with you.
I guess I'd probably be more like, well, that's not the way I think it should be. And thinking that the process may be more difficult than it was before.
This is an encumbrance on me. This is going to make my job harder. How am I supposed to do all of this? How am I going to be sure I don't fail? What are the implications of this for my career, for what I'm doing this week, et cetera, et cetera? That self-absorption is on survival and implications. Anybody else be willing to share, as we're cold in this room? Wavy Dave is trying to help us. Someone said the other day that these things aren't real. They're just so that we can go up and push the buttons and feel better. Please.
It's not personal to me, but I lead process improvement teams.
Excellent.
And they're internal process to organizations. And the one area that we always end up having a problem with is implementation. They're really great going through the process improvement study, identifying new ways to change.
Because it's theoretical at this point, right?
And then you have to get into implementation, which means, oh my God, I'm actually going to have to work, or I'm going to have to do something different.
And
or I'm gonna have
change.
Right. So that has been what we've identified as, I can't leave it to them to we've had to actually have an implementation team to help them, and they're better if they're working through things together versus I send them off on their own. So it's kind of interesting dichotomy when you look at it, is they're a little more willing if they've got people to share it with than doing it alone.
Why? Why are those new best friends helpful?
Well, it's not that they're their best friends, that they're the people they work with. So we can share the load.
We can share the load.
We can, emotionally help each other through it. Communication, we have somebody to whine to when it's not working.
Yeah.
'Cause
Yeah.
we need that.
Yeah, because we're in that transition stage, and that's the processing, and we can look back and think, sometimes there aren't even words for what we feel, and now here we are, and I need to talk to somebody about what this looks like, and I don't care who we are. If we feel out of equilibrium, there has to be some way in which we process it. And the communication in an organization, in society, is important because we are social beings. We are not technical beings. We live in a technical world where so much of what goes on around us is the technical aspect of the organization. But there are two kinds of processes in an organization. The technical ones, the way in which we get the work done and those changes we have to do in order to keep getting the work done. But we also have social processes. What are the ways in which we interact in order to use the organization's collective resources in order to accomplish our common purpose? The reason organizations were created in the first place was to bring people together to harness the collective knowledge, skill, ability, energy, whatever it may be, to accomplish a common goal. What happens is we create in organizations silos. Can you all see a silo, where we put the grain? And of course you know that it has beautiful bay windows so the grain can look out at all the other silos, right? No, the whole purpose of a silo is introspection. And what happens with introspection is we get silo vision, silo thinking, which means we may not even be aware of some of the changes that are happening at a strategic level that are going to affect us. And so bringing people together to process the change allows us to expand our vision, our understanding of how the change is going to happen. UDOT is a pretty large organization. And you're an amazing organization, by the way. But it means then that it's very easy in a small organization, a large organization, to be focused on what we do individually, our responsibilities. I will often ask people, can you tell me what the mission of your organization is? And do you know that in 99 and 44, 100% of the time, the response I get is, I can tell you what my job description is. Great. Now what's the mission? In fact, I was working with a municipality one time. I had about 40 people in the class, all the same municipality, and I said, tell me what your mission is. And they looked around the room for clues, and they looked at each other for clues. They went on their phone, and they said, well, we found the library's mission, and here's the health department's mission. And finally, someone said, I know, let's call the mayor's office. So they did. And do you know what the response was? Why do you want to know? Now, let's go to change again. There should be a direct line of sight between whatever it is you do and the mission. Here you are. Whatever your responsibilities are, there should be a direct line of sight between what you do and this mission. The concept of change then, because it's the basic law of the universe, Any changes that we are implementing in the organization at whatever level should support this. So the question that we ask is, all right, if we have a compelling reason that we have to change things, how is the change that we're proposing going to support, reinforce what we do to contribute to the mission? Now you have something that is anchored, and at least there may be more of a rationale for folks as to why we are doing this. My experience has been in working with organizations for a while is that we tend to be reactionary with some changes. We don't like what's happening, so let's change. But without having an outcome, a defined outcome, that change is reactionary. And all of us have experienced situations where the change is announced, and we look at each other and say, it's not going to work. If they'd only asked me, I could tell them it's not going to work. Well, I will pose that the sign of higher intelligence, which allegedly we humans are, some days I question that, but the sign of higher intelligence is to resist that which we believe is ineffective. Would you agree? Disagree? A sign of higher intelligence is to resist that which we believe is going to be ineffective. Okay, remember my statement. People own that which they have a voice in creating. We can't bring the entire employee population of UDOT together every time there is a change. I'm not even suggesting that. But if there is going to be a change in your area or a change has been announced to your area, who is going to be affected by it? Who do you need buy-in from for that change? And how are you giving them an opportunity to voice what their concerns are? Which is exactly what I did here. Talk to me about your concerns. This is a visceral gut reaction. I can tell you what my concerns are. I feel powerless about this. Let's talk about what you can influence. Don't start here first. Always let them vent. It's part of the transition process. Any comments? I've rendered you all speechless. I'm sorry. Okay, what I have given you is managing endings, a checklist. So I'm going to ask, let's see, would the two of you, and will you work together? Will maybe the three of you work together? 1, 2, 3, and will 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, and could I invite you to come up here and work with this group? You do have a handout? Would you join us up here and maybe the three of you work together? Could I ask you three ladies to work together? The three of you, 4 with 1 gentleman? Okay, so what I'd like you to do, if you will, please, is to walk through this checklist. Oh, first, yes, do say hello to your new best friends. Okay. And do we need to get you involved too? No. Okay. Okay, so everybody's met everybody, right? Okay. So I'd like you to walk through this checklist, and this is not a pejorative experience. There's a Dr. Mencken who says that self-awareness is the first step in liberation. And what he means by that is once we've done an assessment of where we are better prepared to make some changes. It's not a reaction, it's an assessment. So discuss these questions, and where are you within your part of UDOT in each one of these? And let's see what we come up with. So I'm going to give you, 6, 7 minutes to walk through this, and then we'll see what we discover.
Yeah. it's
Oh.
our consultants. These are kind of things that we help them get through.
Well, there you go. Okay, so maybe you can lead the discussion, or maybe you can talk about experiences you've had where these things are successful or not successful.
Got it.
Okay, thank you.
So, we're all in different organizations.
Yes, okay.
So these kind of seem like they would be, they kind of apply if we're in a, yeah, the very situation.
I'm
I
sorry?
guess we don't understand exactly what we're supposed to be doing.
Okay, so in your specific bailiwicks, people understand understand exactly what is finished, what is ending, and what is not. Would you say that that's the norm in your environment? Is it the norm in your environment, the norm in yours?
Very situational. I mean, one situation may be another situation, no.
Would you say that the norm overall is that people understand exactly what's ending, or is there some confusion about what that is? Is there an opportunity to do it more effectively?
Oh, yeah, I mean, it could push you to think, oh, yeah, I'm gonna do really well, this could be a hallmark. You know, people, I might be known a little bit. Or, like, if you don't get it done, then you're just, right? I mean, yeah, you've let everybody down. You let everybody down.
Then there ain't much you can do about it.
Right. I mean, it ended up to be a great thing, but you see a lot of the other floors coming down and they start panicking. They're not going to do that. They're not going to do that. And it's gonna happen. So moving somebody along and having them prepared for it may have happened in one certain situation, but is not happening in the second phase of it.
So there's not a facilitation of transition through each of the stages.
Yeah, I mean, you know, we had changed all of the structure of our office in the first floor. We were prepared for it. And now
The
other
actual
floors-
cubicles,
Yeah.
The prairie dog cubicles, yeah.
yeah, they're small instead of the higher ones.
And so now the second floor it's starting to happen to them, and they're coming down just all in panic, because they were not, I don't know that they were not transitioning into it
Or
well
told.
enough, or told, or how, you know.
Or had any buy-in.
So it happened to them rather than with them? At least that was their
It's happening
perception.
now.
It's happening to them, and they're not flowing with the change. And we were kind of prepared before it started happening to us. We talked about it. And it was like, okay, just be patient, because it'll come together in the end. And so we just held on to that, and we're like, okay, we'll be patient. It's going to be something great. It's going to be something fabulous. Now that everybody's seen what it is, they're all, and it's going to happen to them.
On the next floor up, and the next floor up, and the next floor up.
They're all panicked. So they're not being prepared. So we were prepared, but they are not being emotionally prepared.
And that emotional part is critical. Don't just give me the technical part.
Yeah, yeah.
To demean, to discount. Yeah, to denigrate is to say, They're lousy workers. We don't want to keep them. That's to denigrate, to defame. Mhm.
A way to communicate from region back to central, and that we can deal with issues right away. It's been able to get through either side.
Okay, I'm sorry to interrupt. Forgive me for interrupting. There's never a good time. Someone will always be in the middle of a sentence. But I know that we turn into pumpkins in a half hour, so thank you. So let's talk. What did you discover as you went through these questions? What's the good news? What's the bad news? What's the lesson learned? I'm sorry? A bunch of whiny people. Say more.
No, but I would agree with you. I was sharing, we were doing a process improvement study for the Maricopa County Department of Transportation in Arizona. And these guys have gone through change after change after change in project management. So I literally took 2 entire half days, and all we did was say, okay, guys, now's your time. Get it all out of your system. Why are you not happy? Why hasn't this worked in the past? Why won't it work in the future? Just give it all to me. And then once we got into the actual process improvement study, it was great. They engaged, they were a part of it, and all that stuff, they got it out of their system. I mean, it didn't change.
It doesn't change the circumstances. Rule number 1 in psychology. Rule number 1, accept the person where the person is, not where you want them to be. They're not going there until they believe that they have been heard for where they are. Thank you. What other observations did you make from the exercise, please?
Two sources of change. We need this from one group, we need this, and before we can get done, it's like, now, okay, we need this, and so we are going through constant onslaught. So our management team works a lot together to figure out the best way to implement stuff. So we try to do all this work to prevent our staff from being overloaded, but miss the process of getting them involved in it, letting them know why, giving them voice, giving them a chance to vent. We just saw them as a bunch of whiners.
Right, right.
It's a choice we have, but going through these steps and realizing where they're at, what is a loss to them or what is a difficulty, we never gave them a chance to voice that and be a part of the implementation. So this is really helpful to know, to look for these things to help them through it better.
So remember what we said was that resistance is a sign of higher intelligence if we believe that we are being set up to fail. Do I believe that this change is going to put me into disequilibrium and I don't know how I'm going to succeed? This is not whining. This is a natural reaction to someone who believes that they've not been given what they need to be successful at what they've been asked to do. Now, can we as humans whine? Yes, we can. There are times I put myself in timeout because I'm not worth being around anyone because I just need to do some whining, right? But rather than assuming negative intent, ask, why would a decent, intelligent person act this way? In the change process, have I given them a voice to let them go through the transition piece with whatever's coming at them? The change can be coming from multiple directions. It It is the foundation for the world in which we live today. And yet, if we don't allow people to voice, it's going to get bottled up, and it's only going to make the situation worse. They will find ways to vent. And what we want to do is create the environment where people stay focused on what it is we're doing, not survival techniques that divert their attention. We need everyone engaged in the organization. Any other comments from other?
The other issue to that is sabotage.
Passive-aggressive behavior, yes.
I will make sure it fails.
That never happens, does it? What did this group discover from the exercise? Anything you'll share with us?
One thing that I thought was interesting was that the way I was thinking of it was always sort of this person and this person. You know, there's a person who's trying to make the change, and there are the people who have to do the change. But sometimes there's someone in the middle who gets put in an awkward position where, okay, here are my changes, now you implement them for me. And I thought that was a really interesting additional perspective.
So change can be coming from a variety of places at us. Do we react differently depending on the point, the origination point of the change? Say more. How do we react differently?
Well, I guess if it was a coworker or a peer, you might feel differently if it was your boss that you felt had some control over you, or your wages, or your advancement and stuff. You might take all of those things into consideration.
So do we feel less powerful if it's our boss who we believe controls our future? Oh, what takeaway does that give us then if we're the boss? Okay, remember that if you are in a position of leadership, you cannot divorce yourself from your legitimate power. And when you are the one posing the change, remember that in addition, excuse me, it chokes me up just thinking about it, that in addition to the change, so they're reacting to the change, but they are also reacting to the fact that it's coming from you, the boss. Now, you may have had more exposure to the change, you may understand it on a broader perspective, and therefore you are going to be less ambivalent about the change. Their reaction is not only the change, but also the fact that you are giving it to them. I would imagine that if you and I are colleagues and I ask you to do something that's a change, that you probably would be more vocal with me.
Right. You'd probably go back to the person, get some feedback, and try to figure out what they're doing and stuff. But if it's someone very high up, you may just try to plow through or something without a lot of feedback.
And so the transition is something I'm sorry, you're just going to have to do this on your own. Yeah. And so is it going to be as successful? Probably not, because there, as you pointed out, there's not the support system, or you may go to coffee with friends and vent about, how terrible, you leave me out as your coworker, which then, of course, fosters collaboration, open, honest communication between the two of us. So the question that I ask you is, what is the environment that you create in your sphere of influence that allows people not just to whine, but rather to go through the transition process and move them in the direction that they need to be? You gave the example of the office reconfiguration. It sounds like you gave them the opportunity to understand all of the specifics, think about what the implications, maybe even have a voice in what the cubicles would look like within the constraints of what the change needed to do. What did I hear you correctly?
It wasn't my change.
Okay.
I was one of those that was in amongst the change, and we were prepared for the change. Yeah, on the first floor. Thanks for throwing us under the bus there, Kev. No, I think that we were emotionally prepared for the change, whereas we were excited about it, and it was explained to us, once we get settled, then we'll figure things out, and everything will find its way at the end. But I think don't want it, it's moving their cheese, they don't want to have that change happen to them. It's their personal space and it affects them personally.
It's their moose antlers.
It's their moose antlers, exactly. And they just don't want it to happen. And I just don't think that they have been emotionally prepared for what's coming for them or be a part of it.
I get these people that come in the door and sit there and tell me how bad it sucks and how mad they are and why, I'm like,
But we're living it and we like it. And
Okay.
it wasn't a bad thing.
So
come and just like look around, oh, this sucks. What do you guys think about it? And we're always like, we like it. I mean, you know, you can stand up, look, it's on hydraulics, you know. But they will come right in and look around, just, this really sucks.
and
I can't believe you're taking my walls down. I'm like, honey, I had nothing to do with that.
okay, and so what you are getting is that that mourning for what was that wasn't processed in the transition, and therefore here they are. They're not going over here. Are they? See, I nearly fell over because I can't be in two places at once. Okay. So the transition, even if we have already started into the change, if you're getting the resistance, stop. The change is coming. But let people say, why do you think it sucks? What are the things you would like to?
Time to listen to them.
Well, and they're coming to you. Why?
Person that made the change.
Yeah.
Because they walk in the door and there we are.
Yeah, we're right there on the
Right there
right.
when they
So.
walk in the
And so you are the friendly faces. Mhm. Okay, so look at page 3 there in the middle. I've given you 3 quotes. Look at the middle one. Unmanaged transitions lead to unmanageable change. And that's exactly what you're describing, is the unmanageable change. Look at the third quote. Transition management must rank as one of the key executive skills. Gone are the days of saying, because I said so. We have the most educated workforce the world has ever known. You'll notice I didn't say smartest. They tell us that technology is actually dumbing us down because of our dependence on it and our abdication of a lot of thought processes to the technology. But we have the most educated workforce because technology, the world, the data of the world is in our hands. We can go anywhere, any place because of the data. So as a result of that, we have a transition in the expectation from those with whom we work that we will use the most valuable resource the organization has, and that is what is between the ears of the people who work there. No longer do we hire hands and backs. We hire heads. So you can imagine then that it even ups the responsibility that we have as leaders to engage this in going through the change. We human beings are funny critters. We can know that a change is absolutely in our best interest. We can see the compelling reasons for the change, and we will still continue to do what we have always done. We do that in many facets of our individual lives, and you might even be able to think of some of those facets that you do in your own life. I can think of some that I do. I know I should do A, I do B. I know A is better, but I do B anyway. I'm a doobie, yes. Be a good doobie. So if we understand that, then how do we communicate the compelling reason for the change? We not only communicate it at, but communicate with. One of the most valuable things we can do is involve people in the discovery of why changes need to happen really quickly. There's a book by John Cotter called The Heart of Change. And in there he gives the example of an organization that the procurement costs were just all over the place. And so the CEO gave the vice president of finance the responsibility to find out what on earth is going on. Well, so he had an intern that he asked to go to the various production plants and look at various cost elements. And one of the things they found was that at each plant, they used gloves in the production of whatever it was they were doing. And so the intern came back with samples of gloves from every facility with a tag on it that showed the cost. Well, for the most part, they were using the same gloves, but the cost for those gloves varied widely. So it said that here was an opportunity to reduce costs. So they took all of those gloves with the little tag saying where they had gotten them and what the cost for the gloves were, and they piled them on the boardroom table. They then invited the plant manager and the procurement person at the plant to come look at the gloves. What do you think the first thing each of those people did when they saw that stack of gloves? We have way too many gloves, and then they noticed the tags, and so they rummaged through the pile to find theirs to compare. I'm paying $10 more, and I just make it up this number, $10 more than the other plant was. There was a graphic, compelling picture of what the problem was. Now, the CEO could have said, cut costs. I have no context to understand why I'm cutting costs. Oh, you're just being overreactive. Or I cut costs out of context, and it's not going to accomplish what we need to. So if there is a way to communicate and involve people in understanding the compelling reason for the change, something happens. And then, as was pointed out, we come together to discuss what are the implications, what do we do, and make sure that you define what is the measure of success of this change. When the change is over, what do we want to have accomplished? If we don't know what it is we're trying to accomplish, then people are not going to be anchored in whatever it is we are doing. Any other comments from the exercise? Please.
What if they have a personal connection to something? They have created this process, we've been using it for years, and now all of a sudden somebody else says, I don't like that, we want to change. Well, what happens then?
Well, and I think it goes back to some of the comments that were made earlier about process redesign. So we assess the process. Are they working? Are they accomplishing what we still need to do? They tell us that we should review our processes every 3 to 5 years to see, are they still accomplishing for us what we need them to? If they are, great, keep them. If they don't, change them. Let me give you an example. So we were working with an organization in Seattle, and their processes were convoluted, very short version. And so what we did was we mapped out the process. You do this, then you do this, then you do this, then you do this. Okay, so what we found was that everything got very convoluted around Fred's function. So we took the piece of paper in this case and literally walked through the process. We got to Fred and we found out Fred had died. Everybody knew Fred had died. They'd gone to the funeral. They missed Fred, but they had failed to look at the processes to see how do we change things. And so here was a case where there were workarounds because Fred wasn't there to do the work anymore. So look at your process, assess it frequently to find out, is it still working for you or is it working against you? Then you take away the personal nature of it, because why? Well, I've turned down the page. But that direct line of sight between the process, does it support what we're doing? If it does, yes, based on these criteria. If it doesn't, then we change it. And we're involved collectively in changing it. Anyone who's going to be affected by that process is involved in the change. People own. Yeah, but it isn't an arbitrary change. Okay, I have given you at the bottom of page 3 some reasons that people resist change. Lack of a performance integration system. How do I know what I do ties into what someone else does. There are those silos again. I know what my job is, but I don't understand how it touches others. Give people that broader perspective of how the system is interconnected. Okay, no voice in decision making. Let me draw your attention, second column, about halfway down. Start, continue, stop, doing. So I say to you, Tracy, here, will you do this project for me? Thanks, that's really great. I come back, will you do this project for me? Oh, I appreciate that so much. I come back again, there's one more, and at this point,
Oh, hell no.
yeah. Yes, because you're seeing that the plate, stuff is falling off the plate, right? At no point have I said, you know, I've really asked a lot of you, could we do some prioritization here? Because some stuff I know is going to have to go to the back burner temporarily. Because the response is usually, we'll do all of it now. But we know that that is unrealistic. So are you going to say, hell no? Yeah, you're going to resist. Are you whining? Only the third time. Okay. So what I've given you on the last page is, well, the second to the last page, page 4, are some things that support change. First of all, everyone involved in the change feels that they are a part of the core group. They are an integral part of the organization. They do not perceive that they are tangential, but rather that they are critical to the success of the enterprise. Look at the second bullet. There is a collective understanding of the change context and desired integrated outcomes. This is what's referred to as principles of change. If we're going to implement a change, what is it going to look like if it is optimized? Never change anything until you have defined what the end is going to look like. If I know what it is you want it to look like, I now can navigate in order to get there. So establish what those boundaries are, because what it says then is that we are not reacting, we are being proactive. Next, individuals believe that they are perceived by whoever is facilitating the change as valuable and central to the change goals. Individuals have a voice. There is a sense of autonomy. What is it you want me to be responsible for? Let me know what the boundaries are, and then let me be autonomous in doing it. They have the ability to influence the results, and they trust management. And the way that they trust management is by your proactively interacting with them to find out what are their concerns, what are their questions, what are the barriers that they see that are going to prevent them from being successful and getting those out of the way. There is a fluid ability to connect and work with others. Who is going to be a part of this change, and how fluidly do they come together? As was pointed out, if we can work together, we probably can figure out what the answers are that we need to identify. It is safe to make mistakes. One of the main reasons people resist change is because they feel that the change is going to take them out of their comfort level, and it's going to increase the likelihood that they may make a mistake. There is a book by Catherine Schultz called Being Wrong. It's a wonderful book, should you have some time to read it. And the takeaway from the book is, number one, we as humans are wrong far more frequently than we are right. Number two, that in our society we believe that being wrong is a character flaw. What happens in the organization when a mistake is made? Do we go to learning, or do we blame a person? Number three, we only learn when we are wrong, because when we are wrong, we are thrown into disequilibrium, which means we are now more open to whatever there is to help us grow and learn. So, is it safe to make mistakes? Is change aligned with the individual's values, those reasons that they've come to the organization? Do they see something that is helping them contribute to what UDOT does? All believe they function in an environment, believe that they function in an environment that supports the individual and collective ability to succeed. They have the resources they need, they have the information they need, they have or are able to gain the knowledge, skills, and abilities. There is clear support from management. Management has their back in whatever it is we're doing. There are clear measures of success, and it is safe to fail. And if we fail, we come together and say, what have we learned? We do an after-action review. What worked? What didn't work? What have we learned? And what will we do differently as a result? I've given you on page 5 some questions that you may want to consider within your own department as to maybe even have a discussion with your team members to find out how they feel about change and what are the things that you can implement collectively in order to make change more successful and give people more ownership and more voice in those changes. Will we always be concerned about the implications of change? Yes. But if we as leaders understand these principles of change, we can help people take a deep breath and then move in the direction that we need to go, rather than hold their breath and say, hell no, right? It's been delightful being with you. Keep up the amazing work that you do. Thank you for your time.